Imagine if Tony Stark had Tom Cruise's face. Black Widow was a completely different person. Marvel almost made choices that would have destroyed everything you love about the MCU. These are 12 characters who were seconds away from being played by completely different actors. Before Doomsday comes out, I'm trying to hit 1,000 subscribers. If you want to support my channel and get notified about new videos, all you have to do is subscribe and turn on notifications. Enjoy the video. Iron Man. Today, Robert Downey Jr. is Tony Stark, and no one on this planet can separate the two. But this casting almost never happened, and the alternatives will make your jaw hit the floor. Tom Cruise was attached to play Iron Man for years during the late 90s and early 2000s. Nicolas Cage actively pursued the role and had serious conversations with Marvel about it. Sam Rockwell auditioned and got far enough in the process that Marvel later gave him the role of Justin Hammer as a consolation. Timothy Olyphant was also in the mix and took meetings with the studio. Here is where it gets insane. During the mid-90s, Marvel was so broke, so completely bankrupt, that they put the film rights to almost every major character up as collateral for loans. Iron Man was one of them. The character bounced between studios for years, and at any point, a non-Marvel studio could have cast whoever they wanted with zero input from Kevin Feige. Tom Cruise nearly locked in the role, but he wanted total creative control, including director approval, script changes, and even suit design. Marvel said no. Now here is the shock fact that most people do not know. When Marvel announced Robert Downey Jr., the studio's own board members tried to block it because of his past legal troubles. Feige had to personally fight to keep him, and years later, the superior Iron Man rumors circled back to Tom Cruise for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, meaning Marvel almost brought that original what-if scenario to life on screen. If Cruise had gotten the role, the MCU would have been built on star ego instead of character-driven storytelling, and the entire franchise tone would have shifted toward action spectacle over the grounded, sarcastic energy that made everything work. Black Panther. Chadwick Boseman, rest in peace. He made this role iconic and became one with the character, even though he is no longer with us. But before Boseman was cast, Marvel seriously considered Chiwetel Ejiofor, who they later cast as Mordo in Doctor Strange. John Boyega was on the shortlist and had meetings with Marvel during the early development phase. Chadwick himself was not the first choice, and Morris Chestnut was discussed for the role during an earlier version of the project that never got off the ground. Wesley Snipes had been trying to get a Black Panther movie made since the early 90s, long before the MCU even existed. The reason most of these did not work out came down to timing and Marvel wanting an actor who was not yet defined by a massive franchise role. They wanted someone audiences would see as T'Challa first, not as another character they already knew. Here is the detail that will stop you cold. Wesley Snipes had a full Black Panther script developed in 1992, and the project collapsed because the studio did not believe a black superhero could lead a major film. That was the actual reason given. If Ejiofor had landed the role, the dynamic between Black Panther and Doctor Strange would have been completely rewritten, and we likely never would have gotten the Mordo villain arc that is still unfolding in the MCU today.
Wakanda forever!
Spider-Man. Today, Tom Holland is Peter Parker in the MCU, but Marvel and Sony's shortlist was stacked. Asa Butterfield was the runner-up and got deep into final negotiations. Timothée Chalamet auditioned and was seriously considered before his career exploded. Dylan O'Brien had multiple meetings with the casting team, and Logan Lerman was discussed heavily during the earliest conversations about bringing Spider-Man into the MCU. The reason Holland won came down to one thing. His chemistry read with Robert Downey Jr. during a screen test that Kevin Feige personally supervised. The other actors either aged out of the young Peter Parker window or did not click with the existing cast dynamic Marvel had already built. Here is the shock fact. Timothée Chalamet has publicly confirmed he auditioned for Spider-Man, and the audition happened right before he booked Call Me By Your Name, which means the MCU was one callback away from having Chalamet swinging through Queens. If Asa Butterfield had been cast, the MCU Spider-Man would have likely leaned much darker and more introspective, shifting the entire Homecoming trilogy away from the comedic, youthful energy that defined Holland's version.
These are my new friends. This is Peter Parker, Spider-Man, they're me's from other universes. They're here to help.
Thor. Today, Chris Hemsworth is Thor, but he almost was not even in the conversation. His brother Liam Hemsworth auditioned first and made it to the final round. Tom Hiddleston originally auditioned for Thor, not Loki, and his audition tape is still online.
You chose this. For Outland!
Daniel Craig was offered the role early and turned it down. Brad Pitt was discussed internally at Marvel before they committed to finding an unknown. Charlie Hunnam also tested for the role and was a serious contender. The reason most of these fell apart is because Kenneth Branagh, the director, wanted someone who felt genuinely Shakespearean but also physically massive. Craig and Pitt did not want to commit to a multi-film contract, and Hiddleston, while impressive, read more as a trickster than a warrior king. Here is the insane detail. Chris Hemsworth was actually rejected after his first audition. He only got a second chance because his brother Liam made it to the finals, and the casting team realized they might have dismissed the wrong Hemsworth. That second audition changed everything. If Hiddleston had been cast as Thor, the entire Thor-Loki dynamic that drives multiple films would simply not exist, and the MCU would have lost one of its most compelling rivalries. Wolverine. Today, Hugh Jackman is Wolverine, and he played the role for 17 years across 9 films. But the original choice was Dougray Scott, who was not just considered, he was literally cast in the role. Russell Crowe was offered Wolverine before anyone else, and personally recommended Jackman when he turned it down. Keanu Reeves was discussed during early development, and Bob Hoskins was actually Fox's first idea for the character back when they envisioned a shorter, comics-accurate Wolverine. Dougray Scott lost the role because Mission Impossible 2 ran over schedule under Tom Cruise's production, and Scott could not get released from his contract in time. Fox could not wait, so they went with Jackman at the last possible second. Here is the shock fact that changes how you see everything. Hugh Jackman had so little time to prepare that he studied actual wolves for the role instead of Wolverines. He did not realize they were different animals until after filming started. The director told him mid-production, but by then, the performance was already locked in. If Dougray Scott had played Wolverine, the character would likely have been darker and more brooding from the start, and the humor and warmth Jackman brought would have been completely absent from the X-Men franchise.
Excuse me, I'm Eric Lenstra.
Sounds like Xavier.
Go yourself.
Captain America. Today, Chris Evans is Steve Rogers, but Marvel's list of contenders was massive. John Krasinski screen tested and was a top 3 finalist. Jensen Ackles was seriously considered and met with Marvel multiple times. Chase Crawford auditioned, and Sebastian Stan, who later became Bucky Barnes, was also in the running for the Shield. Chris Evans himself initially turned the role down multiple times because he was terrified of the fame and the multi-picture commitment. The reason the others did not land, it came down to physicality, and Marvel's specific vision of Steve Rogers as a man who looks like a Golden Age war hero. Krasinski reportedly felt he lost the role the moment he saw Hemsworth in his Thor costume during a fitting because the physicality bar was set that high. Here is the detail that should shock you. Chris Evans turned down the role 3 separate times. Marvel kept coming back, and it took Robert Downey Jr. personally calling Evans to convince him to say yes. Downey told him the fear was exactly why he should take it. If John Krasinski had been cast, the MCU's Captain America would have likely carried a much more everyman quality, which could have worked, but would have fundamentally changed the dynamic between Steve and Tony from iconic rivalry to something much softer.
Avengers! Assemble.
Doctor Strange. Marvel had other names on the table first. Joaquin Phoenix was offered the role and entered serious negotiations that lasted weeks. Jared Leto was in discussions and reportedly wanted the part badly. Ethan Hawke met with Marvel, and Ryan Gosling was floated during early development conversations. The reason Phoenix walked away came down to his refusal to sign a multi-picture deal. He did not want to be locked into sequels, and Marvel would not budge on that requirement. Leto's talks reportedly stalled over creative differences about how the character should be portrayed. Here is the shock fact. Joaquin Phoenix was so close to being cast that Marvel actually paused their entire production timeline waiting for his answer. When he finally said no, they had to scramble, and Cumberbatch was not even available immediately. Marvel delayed filming by months rather than cast anyone else, because Feige became convinced Cumberbatch was the only remaining option. If Phoenix had taken the role, the mystical side of the MCU would have been far more unsettling and psychologically intense, which would have dramatically shifted the tone of both Infinity War and Endgame. Black Widow. Today, Scarlett Johansson is Natasha Romanoff. But when Iron Man 2 was being cast, Emily Blunt was the first choice and was actually offered the role before Johansson. Eliza Dushku was in conversations during early development. Angelina Jolie was discussed as a potential Natasha before the MCU even solidified its plans for the character. Jessica Biel also auditioned and was considered a serious contender. Emily Blunt could not take the role because she was locked into a contractual obligation with Fox for Gulliver's Travels, a film she has publicly said she did not want to make. That scheduling conflict is the only reason Johansson got the call. Here is the fact that makes this even wilder. Emily Blunt has been offered MCU roles multiple times since then, including for other characters, and has turned them all down. She has said in interviews that the Black Widow situation left a bitter taste, and she has been hesitant to enter the Marvel machine ever since. If Blunt had played Natasha, the character likely would have carried a sharper, colder edge from the start, which means the emotional arc in Endgame and the solo Black Widow film would have hit with a completely different energy. Star-Lord. Today, Chris Pratt is Peter Quill, but James Gunn originally had a very different type of actor in mind. Eddie Redmayne auditioned and was considered. Joseph Gordon-Levitt was discussed for the role. Glenn Howerton tested and was a strong favorite internally. John Krasinski, again, was in the mix. Lee Pace was also considered before being redirected to play Ronan the Accuser. The reason Pratt almost did not get it is because Marvel initially saw him only as the chubby comedic actor from Parks and Recreation, and did not believe he could carry an action franchise. Gunn had to fight to bring him in for a reading. Here is the shock fact. Chris Pratt sent in an audition tape that was so bad, the casting directors almost did not pass it along. James Gunn only saw it by accident when reviewing rejected tapes and immediately demanded a callback. That accidental viewing is the reason Pratt became Star-Lord. If Glenn Howerton had been cast, Guardians of the Galaxy would have been noticeably darker and more sarcastic, and the goofy heart that made the first film a surprise mega hit might never have existed. Hulk. This role has been through more chaos than almost any other. Edward Norton played the Hulk in The Incredible Hulk and was the original MCU Banner. Eric Bana played him before that in Ang Lee's version. David Duchovny was in early talks for the Ang Lee film. Joaquin Phoenix was also considered for Banner before Norton was cast. And Mark Ruffalo himself was actually Joss Whedon's first choice, not Marvel's. Norton was not brought back because of well-documented creative clashes with Marvel. He wanted significant control over the script and final cut, and Marvel's committee-driven process was incompatible with his approach. The studio released a public statement saying they wanted an actor who embodied collaboration, which was a direct shot at Norton. Edward Norton did an uncredited rewrite of the Incredible Hulk's script, and many of the scenes in the final film are his words, not the credited screenwriters. He was deeply invested in the character, which is exactly what caused the friction. If Norton had stayed, the Hulk's arc through Avengers and beyond would have been far more dramatic and serious, and the comedic Hulk moments in Endgame would likely never have happened.
Puny God.
Captain Marvel. Natalie Dormer was considered after her appearance in Captain America: The First Avenger. Ronda Rousey publicly campaigned for the role. Emily Blunt was once again approached by Marvel. Charlize Theron and Yvonne Strahovski were both discussed during early conversations. The reason it came down to Larson was Kevin Feige's insistence on an Oscar-caliber actress who could anchor a franchise that Marvel knew would be divisive. Larson had just won the Academy Award for Room, and Feige wanted that level of credibility attached to the character. Here is the shock fact. Brie Larson initially turned down the role. She took weeks to decide because she was concerned about the lifestyle change that comes with becoming a franchise face, including the loss of privacy and the intensity of fan scrutiny. She has said she called multiple people in the MCU for advice before finally accepting. If Charlize Theron had been cast, Captain Marvel would have likely carried a much harder, more aggressive edge, and the character's introduction in Infinity War's post-credits scene would have generated a completely different kind of audience reaction. Loki. Today, Tom Hiddleston is Loki, and it is impossible to imagine anyone else in that role. But as mentioned earlier, Hiddleston originally auditioned for Thor, not Loki. Josh Hartnett was discussed for the Trickster God. Jim Carrey was floated in very early conversations before the tone of the film was locked. Cillian Murphy was considered, and he had a meeting with Kenneth Branagh about the role. Here is why Hiddleston ended up as Loki. When Branagh watched his Thor audition, he saw something in Hiddleston's performance that screamed mischief and vulnerability rather than brute strength. He personally redirected him toward Loki, and Hiddleston has said he was initially disappointed because he genuinely wanted to play Thor. The shock fact here is extraordinary. Tom Hiddleston bulked up significantly for his Thor audition. He put on serious muscle mass because he was fully committed to playing the warrior god. When he was told he was being moved to Loki, he had to lose all of that weight to fit the leaner, more serpentine physicality Branagh wanted. If Cillian Murphy had been cast as Loki, the character would have been far more menacing and psychologically terrifying from the first frame, which means the lovable anti-hero arc Loki eventually took through his Disney Plus series might never have been possible. If you made it this far, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to support my channel and instantly watch the next videos. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button. See you in the next video.